Welcome everyone. I'm Joe Meinert. I'm the City of Bowie Planning Director, and we're hosting a series of presentations on the Community Climate Action Series. This is the third of three presentations. Part one was held October 9th, and we listened to a representative of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments who talked about climate change effects in the metropolitan region. We heard a lot about the weather patterns and different things that the region is doing to prepare for things such as sea level rise and adaptation. And what we learned from that was that you really need to have an action plan going forward to mitigate for those impacts. The second part of the series was held on November 20th, and we had three speakers that attended that to present at that meeting. That topic was to save energy at your home or office, and we got a lot of tips from David St. Jean from the Maryland Energy Administration, Deb Drake from BGE, and Dave Fouts from Shaffer Energy Group. They talked about ways that you can save money and energy at home and at work. Tonight's presentation is about bikes, trails, and public transit, and we're going to be hearing from Fred Shaffer from the Park and Planning. He's the Trails Coordinator with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and also from Jim Hamre, who is the Planning Director for WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. What I wanted to point out is that this series of meetings is really a work product of the city's Green Team. And the Green Team is a group of citizens that has been formed to deal with community-wide environmental and sustainability issues in Bowie. And they specialized or divided their group up into specialty areas, and the Green Team's energy subgroup is particularly concerned with the topic of climate change. What this work is going to add up to, all of the input that we're receiving at these workshops, is going to help us get to the point of having a climate action plan for the city. And this is a public participation process which results in a series of actions which we would want the City Council to sanction. And as we go forward, hopefully the community will then participate in those actions with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions within the city. So going forward, we'd like to take the input that we're receiving from these sessions. We have a website where you can go on and add comments, any input that you want to provide to us. We're going to work back through the energy subgroup of the Green Team, have them make some recommendations to the Environmental Advisory Committee, such as setting a greenhouse gas target reduction goal for the city. And then those recommendations will be passed on to the City Council for their action. So that's how what we're doing tonight fits into the bigger picture. The way that the meeting is going to run tonight, we're going to have our speakers present. First, Fred Shaffer will present, then Jim Hamre, and then myself. I'm the third presenter. I will go over some of the results of the city's greenhouse gas analysis that was done for the community and where we're going with some of the actions that have been drafted so far. I did want to put in a plug for the energy audit program. We have City of Bowie has an energy audit program for seniors where the city will actually pay the $100 fee that is charged by the contractors who do energy audits. So you have to be a senior, 55 and older, and if you're interested in that program, please contact Kristen Larson of the Planning Department to apply. And also on the city website, there is a carbon footprint calculator if you're interested in seeing what your actual home does in terms of creating greenhouse gas emissions. And you can go on the website and put in some basic information about your home or your property and see what your actual carbon footprint is for your property. With that, I would like to basically wrap up my introduction. We're going to have the speakers. I will present third. After that, we have a little exercise that we would like to do with the group to try to get you and encourage your input before you leave tonight. So I'd ask that you stick around for the exercise, and after that we'll have a short discussion. So With that, I'll turn the meeting over to Fred Shaffer of Park and Planning.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Like Joe mentioned, I'm Fred Shaffer. I work for the Prince George's County Planning Department of Park and Planning, and I specifically work on bicycle, trail, and pedestrian facilities. And I feel like I was kind of fortunate to be able to work on that. I was always interested in trails, outdoor type activities. And pretty early in my career at the commission, I started helping out with the former trails coordinator. And then when he left, I kind of picked it up. And it's kind of been interesting to see how that whole process of planning for pedestrian and trail facilities, not just as recreation, but also as transportation, has kind of developed over the last 20 years. Oops. Okay, now the first thing I was going to mention, I'm going to try to give you some general information on what the county is doing on a county-wide level, but then boil down to some of the specifics in the Bowie area. But kind of what we base our recommendations on, or my bike and trail and sidewalk recommendations on, is the Master Plan of Transportation, which was approved by the District Council in 2009. And basically this is a transportation plan, but it includes a road element, a sidewalk, bikeways, and trails element, which was the piece I worked on, and then a transit element. And so we were looking at these facilities, and I think it's neat that the trails wasn't lumped in with a recreational use, but it was looked at as it could serve a transportation function in certain situations for some trips. And we look at a whole variety of facilities, plan for a whole variety of facilities. Just real quickly, the master plan, and actually I've got the plan map kind of up on the wall next to the screen, so you can take a closer look at that later if you're interested in. But we have over 250 projects. They include sidewalks, they include trails, stream valley trails, rail trails, side paths, which are trails along roads, and then on-road bike facilities like designated bike lanes. We looked specifically at providing trail and sidewalk and bike access to Metro and to other forms of transit, because we really saw that as being an area where we could really make a difference, where people might want to walk or ride to get the train or get the bus or whatever. And a couple other things that it includes was a complete street section, which I was particularly happy with, in that it includes how many folks are familiar with what complete streets are? So a few, but basically it's the idea that you don't design roads just for cars, but you design it for all modes of transportation. And that includes bicyclists, pedestrians, ADA users, freight, transit. So it's not an auto-oriented approach, but it's accommodating everybody. And one of the things that the plan recommended, and we had been doing this at the planning department level anyway, but when new development projects come in, we want to evaluate it to make sure that it's walkable, that the trail connections are there, that the sidewalks are there, that any outstanding pedestrian safety issues are addressed, and that recreational trails are provided as well. These are just a few of the pictures of the types of facilities. Side paths, which are the facilities along the busier roads, and one example in Bowie is the 450 side path. Connections to Metro, the center top photo is a trail connection that goes up to the West Hydesville Metro. And then more recreational type stream valley trails, streetscape improvements, and the trail, or the photo in the lower right, that was a neat trail. That was actually a transportation condition for development in College Park, where as part of their finding of transportation adequacy, they had to provide a trail connection from their student housing development directly to the University of Maryland. And you can see it's got lighting, they put a bridge in, they put call boxes in, and it's really, really heavily used. I think we allowed for 50 or 60 bicycle parking spaces, and they're all full, and then the fence the whole way around the building has bikes locked up to it too, at least last time I was out there. So that's kind of a neat example of taking a creative approach to getting cars off the road and allowing people to walk or ride their bike for some trips. The other things that we look at are the facilities right along the roads, on-road bike facilities like designated bike lanes, side paths, pedestrian safety features. It's kind of hard to see, but the photo in the upper right is a raised crosswalk, which is one of my favorite pedestrian safety treatments, in that it raises the visibility of the crosswalk while at the same time it calms traffic down to 20 or 25 miles an hour. And I think these are the types of facility that if you really want people to get out and walk for some trips, whether it's to shopping or to transit or kids walking to school, these are the kind of facilities that you really need to have, or people just won't be able to do it. And again, the master plan of transportation kind of guides the recommendations that we make. It's kind of hard to see at this scale, but we've got lines for all types of facilities throughout the county, including the Bowie area. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Part of that's recreation, and part of it's a transportation function where we're trying to accommodate all modes of transportation, make it so that it's possible for people to walk to the store or for kids to safely walk to school. And that kind of gets into the whole multimodal process, where if you don't provide the facilities, people are just going to have to get in their car and drive. But a guy who used to be in our trail advisory group for the county put it better than I did. He said you shouldn't have to get in your car to drive to a park to walk on a trail, but you should have an interconnected network of facilities so you can walk there or bike there or whatever. And a lot of this isn't news to anybody, but there are benefits to having bicycle, pedestrian, and trail facilities. And probably the focus of this group has been in the environmental benefit. And there are a number of things that the county is trying to do to encourage more people to bike or walk for certain trips. And the facilities is one part of it. And we really do see that if the facilities are laid out in a certain way so that people do have those connections to transit or to the Bowie Mark or to the shopping centers, it can really have an effect or impact on the mode split. You can get some of the cars off the road, and that has a positive environmental benefit. It also provides better connected communities. And the thing that was, I grew up in Bowie. I did a lot of bike riding. When I was growing up in the town of Bowie, did miles and miles. I was allowed to stay in the Levitt part, and it was all pretty well connected. But I think what we see in a lot of developments now is each new development that comes in is kind of walled off from the one next to it, and they're all cul-de-sacs that don't connect, and you have to go out onto the major road, go down, and then go back up. And kind of our goal from a planning perspective is to make those connections. Even if the vehicular connection's not possible, let's see if we can at least get a trail or a sidewalk. And that reduces the number of car trips too. And it takes cars off the major roads. Now, improved safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. This has been a real big issue in Prince George's County. And it's received a lot of attention lately. Prince George's County has a pretty high pedestrian accident and fatality rate. And in an effort to improve that, there's a number of things going on regarding pedestrian safety, committees, doing road safety audits, and getting the facilities on the ground. And I guess the last two things I'll mention is having it so people can get out and walk for recreation or for whatever means you have healthier communities, more active lifestyles. And safe routes to school is a big part of it, too. And when I went to school in Bowie, I walked or rode my bike all 12 years. And now, unfortunately, I think fewer and fewer people are doing that. And so, in a lot of cases, it's because the communities weren't laid out so that they could do that. Now, I'll go over these next couple slides relatively fast. These are more the general stuff on what we were trying to do with the Master Plan of Transportation. We were looking at expanding the existing trail network. The Anacostia Trail system is one of the bigger trail systems in the county. It's being extended into DC as we speak, and we also have plans to extend it outside the Beltway. And that trail's neat because it really began as a recreational trail, but it connects to like 4 metros, and people use it for transportation, getting to the University of Maryland, getting to College Park Metro, or facilities like that. We recently broke ground on the Rhode Island Avenue Trolley Trail in Hydesville and Riverdale Park. And this is a neat project from a transportation perspective in that, for those of you that are familiar with Route 1, it's a real busy road. It's intimidating for pedestrians. It's intimidating for cyclists. It's intimidating for anybody that's not in a car. And this would provide an alternative alignment that folks could use that's a little more inviting and connects the communities with the University of Maryland. A lot of other recommendations, specifically around transit stations and what we call centers and corridors. And we specifically recommend that our small area plans, our land use plans, identify priority sidewalk corridors where the county and the municipalities and the state, everybody has limited resources now. We can't fund retrofits everywhere. But I think the local community knows best where those limited dollars can go, as far as this is a real unsafe road for kids to walk on, or this intersection needs to be improved. So we look at identifying those locations in the small area plans. Got some other major trails recommended. We're recommending a trail along Suitland Parkway, which would basically be an extension of the existing trail in the district, and that would provide access to several metros. And one that might be of interest to you, although it's out of your area, is partway down that list, the shared use side path Maryland 704, Martin Luther King Jr. Highway. And I mention that because, of course, you're probably mostly familiar with the WMATA trail. Currently runs from the Patuxent down to Lanham. And this 704 side path would basically be an extension of that trail where the WMATA ends at 450. And would go along the road right of way as part of a road diet, which basically means they'll narrow down the roads for autos and provide the additional space for pedestrians and cyclists. And so basically what you'll have is a continuous straight shot recreational or transportation connection going from Anne Arundel County into the district. And I think that's pretty exciting. And the master plan included a lot of information on complete streets. Now, the Bowie area, we had a lot of recommendations in this plan for the Bowie area, and I think it's largely consistent. You're probably familiar, the city of Bowie has their own trails plan, and I've actually worked with Frank Stevens of the city of Bowie for years, so I think that our trails plan's largely consistent with what the city's been planning. The recommendations I think that most impact Bowie are the complete streets. We're just getting the sidewalks and the on-road facilities in place. The extension of the Maryland 450 side path to Maryland 3. And I understand that SHA is even looking at extending that side path, not only the entire length of 450, but up 3 to 450 in Crofton. And that would provide a neat connection from Crofton to Bowie. And I drive back and forth between the two pretty regularly, and you see people trying to bike it, but there's no space provided. And that would be a real safety improvement. And the other thing I'll say about the 450 trail is it's kind of neat seeing how that came together. It was a line on a map for a lot of years, and then the state started improving 450 in a variety of phases. And as they did it, they started implementing the side path. First, I think, in the Glendale area, then the next part was in Bowie, and now they're looking at the part out to Route 3. So gradually, we've got this side path that's been constructed, and I believe now it's 6 or 7 miles long. Some other facilities, we're looking at extending the WMATA trail into Anne Arundel County, which I know probably a lot of people are looking forward to, because that'll be a real good recreational connection, but it'll also improve access over to Bowie State University and Bowie Mark. We're recommending natural surface trails along the Patuxent River corridor, on-road bike facilities along many of the region's roads, bike lanes along Church Road, the continuation of the Mitchellville Road side path, and then our plan kind of reiterates the work that the city of Bowie's been doing on the Bowie Heritage Trail. And some of the projects that I'll mention later kind of tie into that effort that the city of Bowie's been doing in recent years to better connect the WBNA with Old Town Bowie and the Bowie Mark and the Bowie University. Now, you're probably familiar with a lot of these, but Their neighborhood trails make a big difference as far as encouraging people to get out, walk. HOA trails, trails provided through open space, linking residential communities and the Bowie Town Center in the lower right. And these are the kind of facilities that can make it more inviting for people to get out and to maybe walk over to the town center as opposed to getting in their car and driving in all instances. A couple facilities here. The side path on Mitchellville Road is the lower left, and that's planned to be extended to the entire length of that road as the road improvements are made. And then the city of Bowie can give you more details on the pedestrian bridge there, but that's the one that connects across 197, Bowie Town Center, to the movie theater and the complex on the other side of the road. And I think it's those types of facilities that'll really make it more inviting. And somebody might think, well, yeah, I guess I could actually walk going from the town center over to the movie theater rather than getting in my car all the time. And those kind of facilities make a big difference. And I believe the city of Bowie funded that with the developer for the town center as part of that town center development and with federal funds. The WMATA trail, of course, an existing facility, a pretty popular recreational trail, but it also provides access to a lot of recreation centers, park and planning facilities, links residential communities, and Park and Planning is currently looking at extending this trail both to Anne Arundel County to the east and then towards the Anacostia Trail system to the west. So we're actually looking at expanding it in both directions, which will not only be good for recreational folks, but it'll also be a good transportation link and hopefully encourage people to walk or bike for certain trips. And I'll briefly mention, I spoke to Carol Binns, who's the park planner for the Bowie area, and she mentioned that there are a number of projects that are coming up in the city of Bowie. And one is the extension to Anne Arundel County. The alignment's actually going to go up the old WBNA spur trail, is what we used to call it, and that's the photo in the lower right. That's if you go to the end of the WBNA, there's the spur that goes up towards Bowie State and Fran Euler. The trail's going to go up that alignment and then connect to Bowie State, Bowie Mark, and then over into Anne Arundel County. And actually the connection into Anne Arundel, what we call the spur trail, I believe they said that's going to begin construction in the spring or summer, so it's pretty soon. And then they're currently working on the MOU with Bowie State University to get that trail connection to Bowie Mark. So I think that's exciting. And I think those connections will tie into the work that the city's doing with the Bowie Heritage Trail. And you can really see, particularly when college students are in the mix, how people could end up using those trails for a significant number of trips, taking cars off the road, reducing emissions. And this map kind of shows the proposed trails that we talked about. Let's see. What's the button? Oh, there we go. Okay. WBNA trail runs here, east-west. Anne Arundel County's on this side. Then the spur trail will run up to the north to Fran Euler, Bowie State, and the Bowie Mark Station. And we also have other on-road connections planned along the roadways between the WBNA and Old Town Bowie, because that's another complaint that we hear is folks get off the trail and then they have a lot of trouble getting up to Old Town because there aren't paved shoulders, there's no bike lanes, whatever. And so we have those facilities in place so that as improvements are done, hopefully they'll get constructed. And you heard me mention the 450 side path already. But there's a picture of it, and you can see it connects to the high school, connects to the numerous churches, the library, commercial areas, and I think it'll be neat to see that connected both to the east and the west. Now, the master plan does also recommend a lot of sidewalk projects, and these aren't real glamorous projects necessarily. You won't necessarily hear people talking about them. But we hear from a lot of communities that, well, trails are great, but our neighborhoods don't even have sidewalks. So getting those facilities in there is key. And it's especially difficult in established kind of existing residential communities where you might not have the right-of-way. And there you kind of got to use creative planning or design to get the facilities in. Because when you're building a road from scratch, you can put whatever you want within the right-of-way. But when you have existing houses and utilities and curb and gutter, you got to work with those constraints, and it can be a lot more of a challenge. And I know Bowie's done some sidewalk retrofits in the Old Town Bowie area, and they probably faced a lot of those same issues. There's a variety of ways of accommodating bikes, and I think that this is especially important as well, that we accommodate cyclists and pedestrians along the roads, not just on the trails. Because if you really want to have an interconnected network where people can make trips by walking or by biking, you really need to have the connections going where they're going. And the trails don't go everywhere you want to. I mean, the Stream Valley trails stay in the parkland. The rail trails are in a defined corridor. And to make the full connection, you need the bike lanes, you need paved shoulders, and there's a variety of facilities you can use to make the roads more inviting and safer for cyclists, and to encourage people to make the trip by cycling. And the lower right is the bike lane that was provided as part of the Woodmore Town Center development. And you could do that road one of two ways. You could either leave the stripe off and just call it a wide outside curb lane. But I really like having the designated marked facility there, because the line itself doesn't improve safety, but it does provide guidance to the motorist on where they're supposed to be, the cyclist where they're supposed to be. And it also kind of advertised, look, there's a facility here. You can ride a bike along this road. And this is a picture of 197 right here in Bowie. And I like what they did, SHA did, when they restriped that road. I mean, it had the same cross sections for years, 2 lanes in each direction, a center turn lane, the sidewalks right behind the curb. And when they restriped it, they narrowed down all the travel lanes, they narrowed down the center turn lane, and then by making those small, real simple improvements, they provided an extra 2 or 3 feet on the outside curb lanes for bikes. It may not seem like much, but compared to having no space, it's a big difference. And it also provides a little bit of a buffer between the cars and the sidewalk, which is nice. And probably a side benefit, in some cases by putting bike lanes in, you can narrow down the visual appearance of the corridor and calm traffic. Complete streets. I already kind of mentioned this. I'll just mention again that it's providing sidewalks along road developments, accommodating bicycles as development occurs, making sure that the road and the sidewalk is ADA accessible, handicap accessible. And a big part of what I do, in addition to working on the small area plans, is I review development proposals as they come in. And I actually talk to Frank Stevens pretty regularly on cases that are in the city of Bowie. And one of the policies in the master plan is that as development occurs, that it's compliant with complete streets and it meets the policies set forth in the complete streets section. So when individual developments come in, we're looking to make sure that that happens, that we're not having more developments where you don't have the connections or no side. Let's see. There. Now, I'll just mention this real briefly. I discussed earlier that one of the challenges is retrofitting existing roads to complete street standards. And I think you face this a lot, where you have communities that were built that were auto-oriented, and then it's after the fact that we're trying to come back in and put the sidewalks or the trail facilities in. Well, we had a consultant do a study for us a number of years ago, and they actually looked at strategies for retrofitting existing roads to complete street standards. And a lot of stuff's common sense, but it's things like reducing the turning radius, providing pedestrian refuges so that pedestrians have a place to rest safely when they're if they get caught in the middle of crossing a busy road, utilizing wasted space better, perhaps for bike lanes. Increase crossing opportunities. Those are the kind of things that we look at when developments come in and when projects come in to improve existing roads. I won't go over all the policies that we had in the plan. It's largely what we talked about, and this is what we try to implement when development comes in and when capital improvement projects are funded, that all modes are accommodated. The sidewalks are there, the bike lanes are there. Small area plans identify the priority retrofit, sidewalk corridors. And like I said, I think the local community is best aware of where the gaps are and where we most need the pedestrian safety improvements. So we really try to work closely with the community and the city to get those recommendations included in the plans. The master plan also recommended the implementation of a complete streets policy for the county and a safe routes to school strategy. And both of those have actually been done to some degree. Council Bill 83, 2012 was what they call a complete and green streets policy. So basically what the council did was they mandated that new road construction, new CIP projects constructed by Public Works, and basically roads constructed by developers as development occurs, meet certain complete and green street standards. So they're going to accommodate pedestrians, they're going to have the necessary crossings, they're going to have the bike lanes, and then they're also going to use, context sensitive and environmental, the latest state of the art for handling the stormwater management along the road. Because I understand as far as road construction goes, dealing with the stormwater management is one of the difficult things to do. And it's a real challenge is making greener development is treating that stormwater runoff. And CB 83 kind of begins to address that. And Public Works is actually going to start a working committee, I believe, to refine what the complete street and green street standards are going to be for the department. So you may be hearing more about that in the future. Safe routes to school is important. Like I said, there's fewer and fewer kids these days that seem to walk to their local school. Even when it's right in the neighborhood, you just see so many parents just dropping them off right at the door or whatever. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But Prince George's County is trying to retrofit those facilities where necessary. And Public Works has gotten two fairly sizable safe routes to school grant applications from the state. So they're beginning that process of retrofitting sidewalks along certain schools. And again, just the types of pictures of the facilities that we try to get through development review. Streetscape improvements, bike lanes. And you know, that actually, these pictures bring up an interesting point. A lot of times what we hear is that sidewalks are fragmented. You know, they begin and end at a property line. And part of that's a function of how they end up being developed, in that we can require a developer to improve their frontage and the roads internal to their property. But up until recently, we weren't able to require them to construct off-site improvements. And I'll mention something in a minute about how that's changed. And pedestrian amenities. If you provide an inviting streetscape, it'll encourage people to get out and walk. Benches, street lighting, street trees. I always kind of laugh when you see the sidewalk right behind the curb and there's not a tree anywhere to be seen, and you're right next to 45-mile-an-hour traffic, and then people say, well, I never see anybody walking out there. And it's because there's nothing to encourage them to get out there and walk, and we've got to do a better job making sure that the streetscapes accommodate pedestrians or are inviting. And I forget the person who said this, but if you're designing a community so that people can walk, chances are you're doing a lot of other things right too, environmentally and urban design and transportation related. More facilities. And this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, but something we've been looking at is walkways through parking lots, where you'll have a designated bike lane or a trail taking you to a property, and then you're in the middle of a sea of parking. And from an urban design perspective, they try to break that up for runoff and for landscaping. And I really like to see walkways get through so that you're not just navigating it, walking down the drive aisles. And capital improvement program, what Public Works also does, plays into the whole complete streets discussion, it's not just what the developers are doing, but as Public Works does road improvement projects, they're making accommodations for all modes. This road was kind of a neat project, and I think it's a neat direction to go in that this was Ammondale Road in Beltsville area. And when the plans first came out, it was 3 travel lanes in each direction and a sidewalk on one side. And the community wasn't happy about that. They went back and forth on the design. They ended up taking a travel lane out in each direction, putting a side path on one side, designated bike lanes in the road, and a sidewalk on the other. So that's a much improved kind of complete street, if you will. And that'll encourage people to get out and bike or walk, whereas the other cross section wouldn't. And again, bikes are implemented through the capital, and bikeways and trails are implemented through the CIP process, the capital improvement process, through the development process, and then hopefully we can get some of the gaps filled with grant applications. Now, one thing that changed, I mentioned CB 83, which was the complete and Green Street policy for the county. Well, there were a couple other pieces of legislation that impact this as well. And one of them was CB2 2012, which basically, for centers and corridors, which is basically the high-density parts of the county around transit, the CB2 requires the planning board to make a finding of bike and pedestrian facility adequacy. You know, you hear about development cases and they make a finding of road adequacy. Well, now we're not just doing it for cars, but we're doing it for bikes and pedestrians. And a big part of my job last year was working on some guidelines for how we're going to implement this. And another neat thing, we looked at, it's partly implementing complete streets on site, but it also enables the planning board to require off-site improvements in some instances, so that you can get the full sidewalk to the train station or to the next intersection or to where the crosswalk is. And the guidelines were adopted on May 30th of last year. We've had a few cases go through that were subject to it, and the first one was in New Carrollton, and we actually got off-site sidewalk, some off-site bike lane markings, and then 4 bus shelters. So hopefully that'll go a ways for encouraging people to use alternative modes. I already mentioned the completing green streets. Now, CR 37, that was a council resolution that mandated the formation of a pedestrian and bicycle safety work group, because the accidents and fatalities is at an unacceptable level, and we're really looking at ways we can improve that through edging, through providing facilities. And it's kind of neat how it's played out in that we're trying to follow what's called the county stat model, where we look at where the high incident corridors are. We're actually ranking them 1 to 10 and beyond, and we're taking them one by one doing pedestrian road safety audits. So we're trying to identify the improvements that are needed to make those roads safer so kids can walk to school and people can walk to transit. And I think that's all I had. Do we still have time for questions? If you have any questions.
Maybe just a couple. We're running a little bit behind, but maybe a couple of questions for Fred.
Yes.
My question is regarding the WBA trail, the northern part, that I know it's been a lot of controversy with the use of the land and who it belongs to, and also the bridge that's supposed to cross the Patuxent. Where are you guys on that? Is the bridge going to be built, or is that still in litigation?
Well, my understanding, and this is from talking with Carol Benz, our park planner, I think the alignment in Prince George's County and up to the bridge in Anne Arundel has basically been decided, whereas the improvements in Prince George's County are going to go up the WB&A spur trail. So it's not going to be the traditional railroad, the WB&A line, but it's going to go up the spur trail about a half mile, then cut over into Anne Arundel County and tie into some planned trail development they have on their side. And you're right, I mean, it has been a controversial issue. It's been batted back and forth for years. And actually, I believe we had funding to do the trail on the existing alignment back in 1999. But it sounds to me like they've got a alignment that they can move forward on that'll make the connection. Now, what I asked Carol Benz, well, she said, well, our part of the trail is going to be done or begun in this spring, should be done within 4 months. But the bridge is a whole nother matter, and that's more contingent on working with Anne Arundel to get the funds for the bridge, and then they're part of the trail. But I think Prince George's County's made a lot of progress. I think Anne Arundel County has too. But
Still,
I would encourage you, you can feel free to give me a call. I can leave some of my cards in the back office, or you can give Carol Benz a call. She's the park planner for this area. She really knows the latest, and she's the one I got these updates from. We are also looking at extending the WBNA the other direction too, and we've got a couple trail studies underway doing design work for that in the New Carrollton area and then down in the Chevrolet area. So any other questions?
So, as a follow-up, so it's not going to really connect to the Patuxent River Road part?
Let me, if I can figure out how to.
The WBA actually aligns right at that bridge, and you can just pick that trail up just from going over.
Yeah, I ride it
Patuxent.
all the time. 'Cause
Yeah.
I ride the other part though. Because I work at Fort Meade,
Well,
so I ride.
yeah, this is
Exactly.
this is the existing portion of the
That's a
trail.
good community.
Of course, right now it ends up right at the river, and then Anne Arundel County has a lot of
Right.
sections on this direction. So what's missing is this gap, and what was contested for a lot of years was this stretch right here. And I won't get into all the details of that, but the end result is the trail's going to come to the spur trail, go to the north, then cross over into Anne Arundel County, tie into the trail system there, where it'll come back down to the existing trail in the Odenton area. So it's not going to be as direct as we would have liked, but it seems to be a connection that they can live with on the Anne Arundel County side, so that's what we're working with at this point in time.
And on the Lanham side, I know where that ends on 450, and you're proposing that comes to go across to that shopping area, correct? Is that?
Yes, and actually, the Parks Department actually has funds to do that. And it was years ago when they improved that section of 450, we had the trail line for the Folly Branch Trail under 450. So they provided a tunnel underneath 450 at that location. So there's actually a place where we can put a tunnel so you can go from the existing trail under the road to the shopping center and then continue on the other side of 450. And we're actually looking at a variety of ways of extending the trail. The Martin Luther King right-of-way was one, and then we're also looking at on-road connections so that when you get to the end of the trail, you can get to the shopping centers, or you can get to like New Carrollton Metro or other destinations in that area. Because there are a lot of folks that if there's a safe route, they would like to ride to Metro and save on the parking or whatever. Yes?
I have a question about the Heritage Trail along Chestnut Avenue. Do you have any idea when they're going to do that?
I do not. I asked Carol Benz about the park trail stuff, but I'm not as familiar with the on-road stuff and what the timing for that is. I haven't heard of anything in the short term, but
There's a city segment that is probably north of 12th Street, up around the area of the Railroad Museum, and that's something that's being designed right now. So the city's hoping to build it within the next year.
The other thing and that's an interesting point, the other thing that's interesting about or challenging about making these types of connections is some of the roads are state roads, some are public works, some are municipal, then you got the park and planning land, and it really requires a lot of different agencies to work together to make sure that all the pieces are there. Because I think the Bowie Heritage Trail is going to really involve county roads, municipal roads, park and planning land, and hopefully we have the plan in place. I know the city's done quite a bit of work on that, and it's just getting pieces implemented segment by segment.
Because you changed, it's not going down the railroad now, going to Tanglewood Park. Originally, a number of years ago, they were talking about going behind the houses there and down along the railroad tracks to Tanglewood Park. But according to this map, that's changed.
Well, the city is still trying to implement that section of it down. You know, Tanglewood Park has a lot of wood chip trails or unconditioned trails. There may be an opportunity to improve those trails and make it more of a destination for people. And if you can get to Tanglewood, you can then come out the other end and be close to the WMATA. So we are pursuing that. We're investigating it. We're looking at the right-of-way of the railroad, and we're hopefully going to be able to still make that happen.
Yeah, and actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Bowie plan recommended making some paved connections at that location so that you get from one side of Tanglewood Park to the other, and it would serve as that connection to Old Town Bowie, and then retaining the others as natural surface trails. So there's been a lot of discussions on how that could take place, and it sounds like Bowie's really progressing on it. Anything else? I'll be around after the meeting if there's anything else you want to talk, and I'll leave some copies of my card if you want to get.
Okay, our next speaker is Jim Hamre, and we have to switch seats here so Jim can get down there to the end. And Jim's going to talk about transit.
Do you have my presentation on there?
Yeah, it's on the desktop. Yeah, it's right there.
Can you see which one's yours?
It says Hamre, it's right in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Uh-oh. There we go.
All right. Well, thank you, Fred, and good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Hamre. I'm the Director of Planning for Metrobus as part of Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. And I am going to talk specifically about Metrobus, but I also want to bring in a little bit about what Metro Rail and Metro Access are doing vis-a-vis this subject of your speaker series, and that is climate change and our preparation for it. Our general manager, Mr. Sarles, is actually quite in tune with considerations about changing environment. And so we have, over the course of the last 3 years, been preparing energy and sustainability plans within the authority to be a good partner to all of the initiatives throughout the region, like Bowie's, to identify climate action strategies. And this is something that's been going on. We've done long-term risk evaluations and developed plans and response strategies, because although out in the suburbs where you're fairly elevated above sea level, you may not think about the impact of rising sea level as a transportation issue, but most of the core area of Washington, D.C. is built on a swamp. It's about that far above the Potomac River on a good rainstorm. And we've had instances in the past where the water has either overtopped one of the entrances, or there's been a problem with a pump on the railroad, and so all of a sudden you see the orange-blue close down or the yellow-green close down, and that becomes a regional issue. And New York City got a good dose of what that means after Superstorm Sandy last fall. So we've been doing a lot of project recommendations related specifically to how to harden the system against environmental changes, including trying to raise some of our air intake ducts. And you never had a difficult negotiation until you've gone to the National Park Service and said, oh, by the way, on your national mall that you just renovated for $100 million, we'd like to raise these little towers 3 feet above the grass so that make sure the water doesn't flood through. So we've been a leader in these areas for many years. In fact, in 2002, the Metro Board decided that we were going to be a leader in alternative energies for fleets throughout the region. Now, there's only about 1,500 buses in the Metro bus fleet, but our board thought it was an important statement to begin pursuing an alternative energy strategy. And so first we bought a fleet of compressed natural gas buses, and then we moved into some hybrid energy, and we've dabbled with battery powered and some alternatives since then. But this is something that we have taken seriously and continue to work on, including even our construction, where we now require a LEEDS certification for all of our major construction projects. We've got a new bus garage that opened last year and another one that'll open in a couple years from now that made the LEED Silver rating. And so that's all part of what we try and do across the region in order to sustain and support what people are doing at the local levels. And I just want to talk a little bit about bus services in the Bowie area. We have services that are designed to take you from home and connect you to the rail so that you can connect to the region, primarily downtown. We've got services that are designed to run all day and provide connections within the community as well as to locations adjacent to the community. And then we have services that really focus on major traffic generators like the Park and Ride, like the Bowie State University, et cetera, in order to try and meet the different needs of travel. One thing that's been changing about transportation planning over the last 2 decades is that the majority of trips taken in a community during any average day, the majority have nothing to do with commuting. And so a focus on commute travel is less and less relevant when it comes to trying to reduce the total travel within a community. And so we've begun to look at midday, nights, and weekend travel needs in addition to just the traditional commute market. To do that, we have created a study process that I'll talk about in a minute. One of the things that, from a transit, we're really jealous of the bike community because they're so well organized and they've had such strong participation from bike advocates for literally decades that you're starting now to see the benefits that Fred outlined of all of those plans. And if we could just get all of our bus riders to get just as motivated, I've been thinking we should buy spandex for all bus riders so that you could tell they were special and not just leaving the labeling to the bikers. But one of the things that we've been encountering is the lag of perception between what people perceive as transportation needs in the suburbs versus what the reality is of today. I remember when the Bowie Bay Sox came to town and the stadium was brand new. I don't even remember if there was a Walmart at the time, but it's changed a lot since then. It's amazing, but I think people still perceive Bowie as being way out there, and why would anybody want to ride a bus? Well, it's because there's a lot of here, as well as growing connectivity around the region. And so we may not be real glamorous, but we have been focusing on some of the utilitarian aspects of how do you get around the region, and not just every day, but even to give people options to move around. And the way we did that is we created a study process called a service evaluation study, typical planner language, and what it meant is an opportunity where we create a forum for all of the public policy and administrative types to get together to focus on the issue of what should transit be like in this community, in this service. And then we host a number of public forums where the riders can tell us what we should be focusing on and you know, their particular gripes. We went through this process in 2012, began 2012, ending in 2013 out here in Bowie, and I thought we had a pretty good process and got a lot of really good feedback that helped us focus on not only what the long-term vision of providing a transit-accessible community, but also what kind of steps we can take in the near term, because money doesn't rain down as from heaven. We have to go make the case. And so we've developed some alternatives that look at trying to increase the frequency and the reliability of connections between the Bowie Park and Ride in the center of the community, New Carrollton Metro, to really provide essentially, the vision is to provide the equivalent of that Metro rail frequency and span of service ultimately, to make it convenient. You don't have to drive down the highway to get there, and you don't have to pay us $4.50 to park your car, or whatever the going rate will be. We provide a coordinated alternative, but because of limited resources, we did come up with a plan that we took to public hearing last fall, where we would create 3 different routes, one north, south, and one going to Crofton, and have them all come together at the Park and Ride in a coordinated fashion to provide 10-minute frequency service over to New Carrollton. We got some pretty good response to that. We think it's still the right thing to do. We just need to get a little bit of money out of the state of Maryland. So if you're writing the governor and the Board of Public Works, please mention the Bowie service plan, because they won't do it because I recommend it. It really takes citizens to say this is important to us to be able to motivate the flow of money. Just as a background, Metrobus and Metro Rail services in the state of Maryland are funded by Maryland Department of Transportation. That changed in 2000. The local governments no longer contribute to what we do at the regional level. It all comes through the state. So you really have to have a concerted effort and some good advocates in order to be able to draw attention. And one of the challenges is this isn't a big market. Right now we're carrying about 1,500 riders on an average day. And that is a nice number. It certainly can provide for all-day services, but it would also be nice to have a lot more than that. And to get there, to get the additional buses, to be able to run the additional trips, to provide the capacity, we're going to have to expand that. So, so we've got this plan in the works, trying to get funding in the fiscal 15, which our budget year begins on July 1st, and to be able to do something perhaps in September or December to enhance that service. But also part of it, it's not all about the services. We're also looking at bus stops, connectivity to sidewalks, making sure that they're accessible and have a wheelchair pad, and the wheelchair can get into the shelter, and have crosswalks that connect, and a real experience, because transit riders on one end of their trip usually turn into a pedestrian. Drive to the Park and Ride, ride the bus to the train downtown, you walk away from that location. So it's important for us to really be tied in well with the pedestrian and bicycle community and the connections. And one of the focuses is being able to support connectivity into the rest of the region. This is a list of all of the different routes and bus services that one can access at Largo Town Center or New Carrollton, which are the 2 train stations that our bus services connect to. And you can see that that's a wide distribution. You can get on a bus at New Carrollton and you can ride all the way over to Silver Spring, and if you're at Largo Town Center, you can get over toward the football stadium, and you know, there's ways to use the network to be able to actually get around. I did want to highlight, while I've got this page up on Metro Rail, some of the things that we have been doing in terms of energy efficiency for the railroad. When the original cars were purchased, they were run by a DC, direct current power system. As those train cars reached their midlife, they were converted to an alternating current. What that does is it allowed something like a 20% efficiency improvement in the ability of the car to move down the tracks, and it also allows them to regenerate electricity. So as the train is braking, as slowing down, going into a station, it's actually generating electricity that goes back into the power grid to run other trains that are operating during that period. You may have seen some news broadcasts recently about the unveiling of our new 7000 series rail car up at the Greenbelt Metro Station. The governor and the mayor and some Congress folks came up to look at the new rail cars. They're going to start going into service, I think it's next year. And they are not only energy efficient in their propulsion, but also in their lighting, in the heating and air conditioning, in the types of materials used. So it's been a key area of consideration. But we've also been doing a lot of work trying to be better prepared for dealing with storms and weather, because that's one of the things that the outlook has been: more severe weather, the derecho that we had a year and some ago, the potential of hurricanes, ice storms, deep freezes like we had last week, and then it's 60 degrees outside. It's weird weather around here. But those sorts of things can really have a dire impact on the railroad, especially where steel expands and shrinks depending on the temperature. So you end up with cracked rail, you end up with interruptions in service, and so it's really critical to maintain your infrastructure, and that's what we've been doing for the last several years, to make sure that when it does get to be 5 degrees out, that we're not having to shut down the orange line or go single tracking because rail is cracked and we can't run the trains. And so a lot of that's about being prepared and coming up with alternative strategies and keeping up with your maintenance, and that works on the bus side too, and also providing for alternative ways to get around. We've had a big program of bike and pedestrian improvements and access. One of the things we did do 10 years ago was to decide to put a bike rack on every bus in the region. Now, I urge you to, next time you see a Metro bus going down the street, look at that front end. Many times we have a bike on the front of it. It's been one of the great success stories. It seemed like, well, the average bus goes 12 miles an hour and the average bike rider goes 15. Why would they want to ride on the bus? Well, a lot of reasons. Number one, it's gotten dark. Number two, you're trying to get from one place that has good bike networks to another, but you've got to travel under the beltway or across hazardous area. The third is climate. It's too cold at night. All sorts of reasons. And we're seeing, or if you're downtown, it's a really steep hill to get to Bethesda. So you get on, you put the bike on the bus and ride uphill, and then you ride the bike downhill. People are smart. They figure this stuff out. So we've really been pleased with how that's worked out, and continue to support that. One of the things that we're particularly proud of is the improvement in our fuel economy in the Metrobus fleet. Is not only have we sought alternative fuels, but the improvements of the buses over the last decade has really been dramatic. A 27% increase in our fuel economy, from just under 3 miles per gallon to 3.6 miles per gallon, which is significantly above what our sister agencies are doing around the country. And this has benefits not only for reducing our costs of operation, but also, as you can imagine generation of the carbon-based fuel byproducts. So as I mentioned, more than a decade ago, the board decided that we were going to work toward having a balanced fleet of about half compressed natural gas and about half diesel electric hybrids. And we've been working to that effect. About 41% of our buses are hybrids. Let's see, about that same percentage are compressed natural gas, and the rest are going to be replaced over the course of the next 3 years. So we'll actually achieve that approximately 50-50 balance. And in an annual year, the Metro system, Metro bus and Metro rail, reduce about 260 tons of volatile organic compounds, 22 tons of particulate matter, and over 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide. And that all goes into the regional clean air budget managed by the Council of Government through all of those exercises. So as you can see, we're fully engaged as an agency and as a part of the community in trying to meet the long-term needs and the sustainability of the region, and recognizing that all of the jurisdictions that make up the Washington region, these are key issues, and we're here as a regional agency to provide our support as strongly as we can. And this is my contact information for any particular follow-up. Happy to take any questions at this time or move on with the agenda.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions.
There's an awful lot of senior citizens in Bowie. Why is it that the senior citizens of Bowie have to go all the way to the District of Columbia or to Montgomery County or to Virginia to buy a senior Smart Trip card? You can't even get one anywhere in
Not at the
George
library?
County. No.
Oh.
Used to be a couple of years ago, but that
Yeah.
was discontinued.
Yeah, that was something that I think had been raised during our study process, and we have asked our customer services and marketing folks to see what kind of arrangements can be made to be able to support that. We do sell through the Safeways and Giants of the region,
But
CVS,
not the senior
but not the senior card. And so it may be something that technology will solve for us, because once you get your card, you can put value on it over the internet, and that's something that's coming. Well, actually, it was unveiled, I think, last summer, but not specifically for seniors. Seniors that need to show your ID thing.
I can buy a senior Smart Trip card on the internet for New York City Metro, but not for Washington Metro.
I'll take that one back, and
Okay.
we'll
It would be
if they
good
can do it in
because
New York, we can do it
All
here
of
in
us senior citizens who tend to have a lot of friends who are also seniors come to visit and want to go to Washington
right.
to see all the sites, but you can't, there's no place to buy a Metro card unless we get in the car and drive all the way to Gaithersburg, Virginia, or wherever.
But it defeats the purpose.
It's sad.
Thank you.
The park and ride in Bowie, I don't know if it's a Bowie issue or a Metro issue. If there's no direct access from the park and ride out the backside to like the Hampton. I had family members who are handicapped, and I had them stay at the Hampton Inn, and we actually had to put them in the van and drive them up and around and out and into the park and ride where there was no more handicap spots left to park.
Mhm.
And instead of just directly walking out of the Hampton into the backside of the park and ride. And I didn't know who we even addressed.
Shortest County operates
County?
the park and ride lot. We can try to find out. I thought there was a gate connection there.
Well, maybe it's just not routinely open enough, or it's not
That would
well
be
marked, but
unfortunate.
I've heard that complaint in other park and ride locations too.
so I know there's a gate that goes out to the bike trail, but we were conserving her battery for downtown,
Mhm.
and we didn't, every route was just taking, a mile off of what we could do downtown, so,
I'll ask the county.
okay.
All right.
But I will say that once we did get to the park and ride, the bus drivers were wonderful, getting
Good.
her on and off the buses.
Yeah.
there a bus route to Annapolis? I mean, you're talking about
No.
going to Crofton, but is there one so you don't have to go on 50?
There's one for Annapolis to get to here, but not the other way around. We have proposed that to the state as sort of a long-term regional connectivity strategy. They said no. That's the
But
short.
that was true 15 years ago, Annapolis to there.
Yeah.
Still no?
And no, we don't. The closest you can get is you can take the B30 bus out of Greenbelt. That'll take you out to the airport. You can transfer to the light rail at the airport. That'll get you to Baltimore, and then you can take a bus down to Annapolis from there. We had last year. Last fall we had proposed our B30, which is the connection between Greenbelt and BWI Airport. We'd proposed taking it off to run by Anne Arundel Mills and the casino on its way into the airport, so that you would have the opportunity of connecting to the Annapolis Transit, the Howard County Transit, and provide two-way connections. The outcome of the hearing process was a decision not to do that, led mainly by the county, and so we're hoping to get a chance to revisit that as a regional discussion. But right now, that has not been funded.
The one is out, not in.
Yeah.
So if we want it, we have to push all three committees?
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome to transit planning in the Washington region.
We're old, you know, we can be nuisance.
Good.
I got nothing but time.
I noticed on your first map and then your revised map, there's no connection from the Bowie area to Greenbelt without first going all the way down to New Carrollton. Was that addressed in your survey? And is there a reason why that bridge isn't there? Because I know there's a lot of people in the Bowie area that work in Greenbelt, and that certainly takes a long time to make that connection. It makes you want to drive.
Yeah, we've looked at it as a way to get to work as an alternate, and it would take over 2 hours for our 8-mile commute.
Right.
So, which means it's not feasible.
That's the challenge we faced was trying to stay within existing resources with these recommendations. That would have required additional buses to make a new connection.
Sometimes there's two bus routes that are fairly close together. They may be only half-mile apart, but there's no sidewalk.
Right.
Sometimes
In your first map, it actually shows, you can see how the line goes down 564. You can see there's a little gap up there, just above the B in Bowie. Where it's like you miss by that much. And again, there's no pedestrian connection there if you were to hop off the bus.
Or take your bicycle to bridge the gap.
All right. Thank you. We'll take a look at that. Sir.
Yes, one of the things that might encourage people to use Metrobus more in Bowie is revocation or modification of the rule that if you add value to a smart trip card, you must use it within 30 days or they take your money. So if you're an occasional user and you just want to maintain a reserve on a card for, say, a week when you don't have the car or whatever, they don't buy that. You have to use 30 days or it's their money. And that is prohibited.
Well, that might be an incentive. We've been basically sort of going the other approach, trying to get more people to have a smart trip card and have no penalty for having it to try and improve the speed of boarding and reduce the amount of cash that we have to deal with on a bus. Unfortunately, we haven't been all that successful. We've gone from basically 80% of people paying cash down to about 40%. So that's positive. We'd like to see that get even deeper. So that's sort of been our overall objective, and you'll get a chance to share your opinion. At the end of the month, we're going to be holding public hearings about the next fare increase. And the Prince George's hearing will be at the Greenbelt Marriott. So I would encourage you to raise that as a thought.
You were talking about enhancing the bus service to New Carrollton Metro. Would that include weekends? Because now it's really hard to get there.
Yes,
It would? Oh.
it would. That would be
And
one of the recommendations.
Would it include any later night? Because, we can't go downtown on the weekend and take Metro without driving to New Carrollton.
Well, not immediately, but the hope is that as ridership builds and there's demand to justify it, that yes, you could. An example being, we did a study like this with Greenbelt about 3 years ago, restructured their services. I think we've got 15% increase in ridership in that period, and so last summer we added an 11 o'clock bus. Services ended about 9. We added an 11 o'clock bus so that the folks that were at the Kennedy Center, caught the train home, had a bus to take them into Old Greenbelt, and that's been fairly successful. So we would be happy to do that sort of thing out here as well, because that connectivity is part of the lifestyle of living in this region.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
All right.
Since the Metro buses accommodate 2 or 3 bicycles, how many Segways?
Oh. We encourage people not to bring a Segway on a bus, because there's no way to secure it, and it becomes a hazard if there was any sort of an accident. So I think officially we don't have Segways on the bus.
But then that cuts you off from all the other pieces of transportation. And like them, they've got that little piece between the 2 buses.
Yeah.
Segway fills that in.
Well, it might, but I would encourage the bike instead.
Oh, and no shoulder
No
either.
shoulder. No.
Okay,
And busy, right, otherwise a bicycle would fill us in, but no, I'm not going to.
okay.
Okay, well, I wanted to reintroduce myself for some of you who weren't here when I started. I'm Joe Meinert. I'm the City of Bowie Planning Director. And what I want to do tonight is talk about 2 different things that we've been working on in the Planning Department, working with the Green Team. The first is that we've conducted a greenhouse gas emissions study of Bowie for the community. This was prepared in cooperation with one of our Green Team and Environmental Advisory Committee members, John Allender, who really put a lot of work into this. And we had a focus group meeting with some professionals in the field last winter, and some of these slides, or this slide presentation, was prepared for that meeting. So I'm going to skip through a number of the slides, but just focus on the main ones to bring you up to date. Some of the history of our greenhouse gas analysis is that the City of Bowie actually received a federal grant several years ago to conduct an analysis of city operations. And so we looked at the greenhouse gas emissions of all city buildings, our vehicle fleet, and other city operations. And a greenhouse gas analysis was done, recommendations were made, inventory was taken. But what we did not have a chance to do under that study was to look at the overall community of Bowie. And so now we're at that level trying to look at the community. Some of the factors that go into collecting data for greenhouse gas emission studies include the population, number of households, the amount of commercial space that you have, also the number of employees, and also looking at the industrial sector. And so we picked the base year of 2007 for the community analysis. That matched the local government analysis that was previously done. And our forecast year is 2017. So we did a projection based on straight line build out of the area. And so you can see how our population and business sector increased in quantities. This diagram shows the greenhouse gas results of the computer modeling. I mentioned 2007 was our baseline year. you have basically 4 sectors that you model in the the residential sector, the commercial sector, the vehicle sector, and waste sector. Obviously, the bigger of the two, or the two biggest pieces of the pie are, if you add them together, are the commercial and residential buildings. Our analysis revealed that approximately 307,000 equivalent CO2 metric tons in the 2007 baseline. Factoring this growth scenario, looking out into just a straight line growth projection, that amount of metric tons of CO2 emissions increases to 346,000. Again, you see the distribution in this pie chart in the middle. And then the 2017 projection was done based on some assumptions that we made, looking at some available federal reports for vehicle mileage improvements over time, better increased efficiency of appliances and things like that. So you start to factor those things in, and we were able to predict that our greenhouse gas emissions would actually come down in 2017 below the straight line growth scenario. This slide just very quickly shows a couple of the inputs that we did on the model. These federal energy intensity reports are available from the federal government. They study every aspect of the energy industry. What we did here was look at residential energy, and there are a couple of lines that were plotted in terms of the data that was collected by the federal government, and different scenario paths represented by each line. And so in our review, we picked a point on the line that corresponded to 2017 and used that value in the model that we were doing in our forecast for 2017. Same thing with commercial buildings. I mentioned a couple seconds ago about the improvements in vehicle fuel economy. And again, there's a graph that's put out by the Federal Energy Administration that shows the improvements in fuel economy over time. And so we simply picked the point on the line where our forecast year was and factored that into the model. So essentially, that's how we ended up with this 2017 projection. So the second part of my presentation is to show you the kinds of things that we're hoping will be able to be implemented in Bowie in terms of our strategy for trying to get to that 2017 projection. Things that will lower the greenhouse gas emissions in Bowie. This document is available back there on the table, and if you haven't picked one up, I would encourage you to do so, because this is really the essence of why we're all here and what we're trying to accomplish through this series of climate action presentations. The different colors in this presentation, there's yellow for energy, there's blue for transportation and transit, and then the green for the waste sector. Energy includes both residential and commercial. So we would like your input on that either this evening, or you can go online and add comments to our website at cityofbowie.org. What I'd like to do just very briefly is give you an idea. I'm not going to read every one of these, but give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're talking about. We had an in-house group of city staff, multidisciplinary from all departments, meet and talk about these strategies. What we're trying to do is find things that would actually work in Bowie as opposed to working somewhere else in the country. So that's the kind of thing we'd like to emphasize today, that if you want to make suggestions, we would welcome you to do that, but try to stay focused on things that would be realistic to happen within the city of Bowie. So first of all, the first slide here covers a couple of the energy sectors, and I mentioned residential energy. That's the first one. The second one is commercial energy. A few things that we're doing now in terms of residential energy is that we're trying to look to publicize weatherization programs to make homes more efficient. Also energy audit programs. The city is, I mentioned at the top of the presentation that we have a program that's already set up geared towards senior citizens. If you're a senior citizen, age 55 and older, we are providing $100 toward the energy audit that BGE operates in the city. So please contact Kristen Larson in our office before January 31st to file an application for an energy audit reimbursement. In terms of the commercial, there's some things we're doing here with our green team. One is a green business recognition program. There's currently a Chamber of Commerce awards program, and just last year they started the first Green Business Award, which is really was a big success, and we were able to recognize a couple of the businesses in the city that were doing green practices. Also, one of the things the Green Team wants to do is to promote the Maryland Green Registry for businesses. And the Green Registry is an online website that the state monitors or maintains, where businesses can upload information about 5 practices that they have successfully implemented at their business. And it's basically a big database where others can review that information, and it can be shared so that the examples can be used and implemented in other businesses. So the Green Registry is a pretty good program. A couple of the other energy-related strategies. One is to promote green and expand green building and water-efficient best practices for new and existing buildings. One of the things we think we can do is better track and showcase green building projects throughout the community. There's a lot of green building being done in Bowie, and we feel like we need to tell the story so people can really see what those examples are and maybe emulate those. And then the last energy-related strategy is to encourage and incentivize the installation of renewable energy projects within the city. We've seen a big growth in the past year in terms of residents putting solar panels on their houses, a big increase in the number of permits for those. One of the things that we recommended was using the city's cable TV channel to get the word out on options for purchasing renewable energy from their utility or from other alternative power sources. Within the next sector, which is transportation, we have a number of strategies dealing with reducing single occupant vehicle trips throughout the city, and that's what we've been talking about tonight with trails and transit. The city participates in Bike to Work Day every year. We have actually 2 pit stops for Bike to Work Day, one in Old Town Bowie and one here in the Bowie Town Center, where we promote biking within the city and biking to work. The City Council also regularly participates in Car Free Day. They pass a proclamation identifying a certain day in the springtime as Car Free Day in Bowie. So there's a number of strategies here under reducing single occupant vehicles. The next transportation strategy relates to reducing vehicle miles of travel citywide, and that is essentially focusing on Jim's topic of transit. Some of the things that Jim mentioned earlier about trying to restructure the service routes within the city, that's something that we're actively pursuing so that we can provide the transit service more readily to our residents and allow them to get out of their cars. One of the other short-term strategies we had was to more effectively promote the availability of MARC commuter rail to city residents. It's essentially a metro station in Bowie that is kind of underutilized. If you go up there at any time of day, you'll see there's parking lots only about a fourth full. Then the last transportation strategy has to do with facilitating the development of low-carbon transportation choices and improving the efficiency of transportation options. And again, getting to the issue of mode share, using bicycles and trying to improve pedestrian facilities so that some of the things that Fred talked about in terms of complete streets and the example of providing buses that accommodate bikes. Also the discussion about zip cars. They've been used successfully in other parts of the metropolitan area, and perhaps zip car drop-off point could be placed at New Carroll or at Northview Park and Ride. And so we have a series of strategies revolving around providing transportation options. And then finally, the waste sector. There's a number of specific actions that we're looking at now, one of which is to look into composting to see if there's a way that we can further reduce the amount of the waste stream through composting and essentially doing away with certain types of waste right on the property. We're also looking at improving the carbon footprint of the city's waste reduction system, having that discussion about whether it makes any sense for the city to switch to a once-a-week trash pickup system, and that's something that is being discussed this year as we're getting into the budget process. So I would encourage you all to think about these strategies and this list of implementation measures, these action steps, because this will go a long way toward defining what our climate action plan is for Bowie. Again, this is a community-wide analysis that we're doing. We're not simply focusing on the local government, because the local government is only a small fraction of the community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. So we're trying to pull together the best collection of actions that we think will work in the city of Bowie, and we would encourage your input on that. Please feel free to take one of these and provide comments to us. Thank you very much for your time. It is on the website. There's copies back on the table.
No, they're all there.
All gone? It is on the website. Thanks for coming.